Episode 3.
And we are back, folks, here on the Michigan Insider Sports Talk 1050 WTKA, online at WTK.com. Sam Webb, Mr. Ira Weintraub on the other side. I'm live on location down in Indianapolis. Gonna head over to Lucas Oil here in a little bit, but wanted to get on with the MGoBlog Roundtable crew for a few because they are coming off of an event where they got a chance to hang with the players. So I want to get a feel for the vibe that they got off of this team as they prepare to defend the national championship. So joining us as they do every single week for the MGoBlog Roundtable, starting off first, is the man that started it all at MGoBlog, Brian Cook. Brian, good morning. How are you?
Morning. I'm well. I just want to say, Sam, that the experience of interviewing the players the whole time I was doing it, the thought Sam Webb is much better at this than I am was going through my head. So it's it's difficult. It really is, and you're excellent at it.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate that. I know you did a great job, as did you, Seth.
Oh, I was barely on it because I get all my mics set up. We had to freak out. We couldn't find our equipment at first at one point, and then I finally get everything set up. I got everything tested. It's all working. And then the first time the first guy picks up one of the microphones, it breaks. So we had to be so for a large segment of the podcast, I was not even on it, right? And then we had a couple guys trying to share one mic. It was a very professional podcast.
All right.
It was even worse than that for Seth because I thought their equipment was here in our closet and where they do some of the podcasts, David and Alex at least, but it turned out that Alex had it at his house, and I didn't know that. So
I wasn't going to call him out for that.
So Seth,
I was going to let that stay internal.
Had a difficult beginning just to getting that whole thing set up. So yeah, it was a hard day for you, Seth. I know that.
Craig Ross, how are you this morning?
I'm doing fine. I was impressed with Brian and Seth's work yesterday, and I commend it to anyone who's interested, and I suspect anyone listening to the show is interested. It's got a lot of interesting stuff that interested me, and just to begin with, you'll hear Ben Bredesen, who's a really, really smart and interesting guy at the very least. So
yes, I want to dive into that because I'm curious you guys' takeaways. As much as I like to hear their responses, your impressions of them, your impressions of the team, were you moved any, your thoughts of this squad heading into the season based on your interactions, starting with you, Brian?
Well, I mean, these guys are tight-lipped. Like they they've obviously gone through some training where it's like if you don't have like there's some stuff that they don't want to say, and we chart all the games and we ask a lot about specific stuff, and so it's sort of a minefield sometimes, asking questions that are interesting but will be answered. So, but I mean, the overall impression I got is that the culture of the program is still very strong. Like I asked Donovan, because I remember I think at this event last year you were on a golf cart with Donovan, and he was like, I was surprised when Quorum came back.
Yeah,
and I was like, you got to go get your money, and he's like, I'm like, but you came back. I mean, you scored the winning points in the national championship game. You could have gone and got drafted. You would have been drafted. Why are you still here? And Donovan Edwards starts talking about just the culture of the program, and that's the kind of thing that I thought filtered through all the players that we got to talk to. Is all of them were dedicated to Michigan. All of them thought that this was a special place, and all of them were prepared to continue on the legacy that the guys who left last year after winning the national title left. And Edwards said that, particularly for the guys on offense, they have a bit of the chip on their shoulder because they weren't the guys last year for the most part. Tyler Morris wasn't the guy. None of the offensive linemen were the guy. He wasn't the guy. Whoever the quarterback is wasn't the guy. Like the number of guys who were the guy last year is basically Colston Loveland on offense. And so these guys are going to be hungry. They're going to want to prove that they're just as good as the 2023 team.
Mm-hmm. Seth?
Yeah, and they're just, they're very mature and they like each other. like every single interaction you see between all these guys is, and they don't have to be. I just remember teams that Michigan's had where, like, the offensive guys were over there and the defensive guys were over there, and even at some of the reunions I've been to with some of the old guys, it's like that, right? Like, oh, he's an offensive guy, we don't talk to him, right? And these are guys who've had time to, gel again even afterwards. And this team is they all like each other. Even guys who are all competing for the same position, right? Like, starting quarterback in Michigan is up in the air, and there's several guys involved in this, and they're all sitting there talking about like how great this guy is at this thing, and how great. Let me tell you, Alex Orgy's not there. Davis Warren is like talking up Orgy as a pass reader, and he's like, these certain things he does so well that I don't do well, and that, like, we have to tailor the offense to what I do when I'm in there, and the coaches tailor what he's good at. And then we're like, he's not talking about running. He's talking about how they read things and certain concepts that they like. And I just think it's very interesting how much they build each other up. Now, as Brian mentioned, they've been you could tell they've been coached to do this. They've been educated in how to be in how to represent the team in front of the media. But it's still hard to do that, and you can't do it that well unless it's genuine. And that just it stands out among athletes who are very individually focused often and very, focused on how can I get better and how can I get what I need out of this. And none of them are even thinking about what they want. They don't want to talk about what they need. They want to talk about their teammates. They want to talk about things in front of them and how they win things. And it's, like I said, very mature group of guys. And it was too genuine to not be. Yeah.
Craig, your impressions listening?
Well, yeah, I got the same sense, but this goes back some time. Even when Lloyd was here, I always got the sense that there was more mutual support between players than not. And I can recall, I can't recall this guy. He was a safety, and he was in front of the media, and he just didn't want to talk about himself. He wanted to talk about another kid who hadn't played much, who was playing that week because there was an injury. And any question directed to him, he deflected to talk about this other guy who had been pretty much a backup. And that is a long time back now. It was, Lloyd's either last or next to last year. And one of these, I'll remember their names eventually, but right now I don't. And so I always have gotten a sense of mutual support between players within the program. And that was at a time when I was able to be in Lloyd's office a lot, where I was up talking to him about various things, and players would come in, and I always got a sense that of we're all in it together more than what am I going to do about myself.
Mhm.
And so I think this is real, and I think it goes back for a while within the program and the culture of the program.
So, everyone, it's crazy, running into people, even around town. You would think that Michigan folks in Ann Arbor aren't asking about the quarterback, because there's been a conversation so much. But everywhere you go, it's like, what about the quarterback? What about the
Yeah.
quarterback? So, what about you guys being around it, being around them? What impressions did you get about the quarterback situation?
Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing. Like, that
Yeah.
was the one thing that I was like, you're not going to get anything out of us on that. So they're I don't think they know. I think, especially because, Tuttle was out this spring. He had a surgery for, I think, a back issue. So he hasn't been able to be in that kind of same milieu as the rest of them. And, Davis Warren and Orgy, we talked to them, and like, it was, there wasn't going to be anything about the depth chart coming out that day, let me tell you. So, I mean, I feel like the quiet confidence that Orgy kind of carried himself with was maybe indicative of something, but that's just me guessing, really.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what he seems to be like. I mean, and he's a super smart kid, and that seems to be his personality as much as anything. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Seth.
Yeah, I mean, I got a better sense because, like I said, I don't interact very often with the players, and being able to do that, I got a better sense of the limitations of that format. Right, when they are there to not give out certain information, and they're there to, they'll give you what is on the table, but most of it's not, and it's just you can't look at a guy. And I know you try, right? And Brian, like, oh, the way Orgy carries himself, and you get a sense of who the person is a little bit. But that kind of thing, it's just you can't tell, and you have, I did. The one thing I learned was maybe not from the interviews, but just getting to talk to different coaches afterwards because you hang around the event, you get to talk to them. Certain coaches like Ron Bellamy is holding court, and my God, we got to get that guy to talk about football sometime or get him on our show because he's explaining things. He's in charge of the passing game this year, and he was explaining how they see the concepts and how they teach the concepts. And then he was talking about how, what their game plan was for the Rose Bowl and why they prepped motion so much for these things. He's just getting in the nitty gritty, and people, they're just golfers, right? People just hanging out, and they're understanding it. He's like teaching them football. And like at the end of this thing, I'm like, these guys can go out and probably, run some reps at receiver. They know what they're doing now. So you got a sense of like why these guys do what they do. You understand why Ron Bellamy's a really good coach. Steve Kasula, I got to talk to him a little bit just off the record, and he was just, so excited about the guys. You could tell like he knows these players inside and out. And then Wink Martindale, I gave me the cold shoulder. He didn't want to talk to me at all. And then there was like a question when they're doing someone made a joke about like, him being Don Brown when they were doing the auction later. And like, he just did not want to hear anymore. So I mean, you got a little better sense of like who these guys are a little bit. And it's that part was interesting. I don't think you get at all sense of like anything football wise.
Yeah, it's funny. He's heard that a lot, that Don Brown thing, and it's not like he needs to hear it from fans. Like he has a dude who was on. I mean, Sharon was here for that. Brian Jean Marie was here for that. Like
I just think it's funny that people even think that because Don Brown had a very different system than this system. I mean, unless you're talking about the things that Don Brown would do with his 30 fronts on third down, because those have some similarities. But that's not what people are thinking about when they're thinking about Don Brown.
Yeah, and I don't think that they are getting into all the technicalities. I think they just more approach, more the approach than how that approach is executed.
Yeah,
is I think what people are talking about. So
yeah. I mean, but Wink's not going to, he just didn't want to hear anymore, but he's sick of it already.
Right.
And Lamar Morgan, I talked to him briefly, but he seemed just like, he doesn't know where everything fits yet. And he's very careful about what he says and what he doesn't. So you got a sense of who some of these guys are, but yeah, I can't wait to get Bellamy in like some sort of, you could just have him teach people and he just wind them up and have them start talking. And he's great.
Yeah, man, that is, I think, to me, you don't really get a feel as an outsider. This is my own personal journey. You don't get a feel for how important the elements that we're talking about are the culture, the chemistry, until you see it not be there and the impact that it can have on the team. Like we've seen what it not being there looks like and how bad it is. And then we see what it being there, what a difference it makes for Michigan. It's what Ohio State is trying to do. A lot of the things that Michigan just does now and just says now, Ohio State, they're saying, you hear Ryan Day saying some of those things at media day and the players saying some of those things. Like I think it was Denzel Burke who said, hey, we got a lot of talent, but it's not about talent. It's about, we got to get out here.
That was Igbuka.
That was Igbuka who said that? Yeah, it's not about talent. It's about
what I love about these Ohio State questions is Michigan went through this too. They're giving anodyne answers, right? There's nothing really in those answers, and there's nothing in those questions. But everything they say is going to be picked apart and turned around on them, and I love it. I love that they're in that position now.
Yeah, I think with Ohio State, I part of me until I see it actually in practice on the field is just you're mimicking, you're parroting. This is not authentic. you're
Well,
saying
no,
what you
because
think needs to be said.
Ohio State is good at being what they are. They're fueled by hate for Michigan, and they are professionals, and that's what they do. They go up there and act like professionals. The trying to make them into Michigan is not the right, unless they want to get rid of their coach and turn and pull a different guy out. But I mean, I think that they're still a great football team, and they're still great football players. And Emeka Buka's been playing football for a long time and knows a lot of. He's been having some of the best receiver coaching you can get in college. He's a good player, and if you really got into the gritty with him, he would know exactly what he's talking about. I love, just as a rival, that like everything he says, even if it's nothing, is just going to get turned on him because of the situation they're in now.
So, were there any so much of what you heard, like you guys say, they're buttoned up. Was there anything that surprised you, Brian? Anything that were like, wow, I didn't know that. That's
Well, I mean, Sharon was more open because no, he's not going to get in trouble. And like it was interesting because like when I was talking to the players, I felt like I was trying to make the players comfortable so that they would talk. And when I was talking to Sharon, I thought Sharon was making me comfortable, and I thought that was like just his overall demeanor. I thought was fantastic. Like I exited that interview thinking that Michigan was in very good hands, which I already thought, but it confirmed to me that this guy is like the guy, and I think that he's going to be a fantastic head coach here. But like I wanted to get into some specifics, and I was like talking about the 4th and 2 from the Alabama game, and I was like, is this in your head that you had an 8-yard run off this exact same formation, this exact same motion earlier, and this is like the play you want to go to? And he's like, yeah, like this is exactly what I do. I asked him if he followed Dan Casey on Twitter, and he said yes, and that's where the RB mesh traffic came from. So he's a guy who is very open about like where he's gonna like find stuff to put in the playbook. And I thought that interview I think was revealing to me, not just because of the content of the interview, but just the way I felt. I felt much less nervous interviewing Sharon than I did interviewing the players, because I felt like there was less that I had to do.
Yeah, you got a sense that he is head coach material, I guess is the terminology you want to say. Like he's one of those guys. He is just you understand why people talk about Sharon the way they do. When you get him talking about football and you get him talking about this team, you understand why people are attracted to this person. He's got that magnetic personality, and he's got that understanding. He's got that will to teach. You could see him being like, the most popular teacher in a high school. That kind of person, right?
I think he wanted to talk to us about certain things, but like thought that he shouldn't. But like if we got him in a context where it wasn't being taped and broadcast, that he would have been very open. And so like I just feel like he's going to be a big hit in living rooms when he's a recruiter, and when he gets in situations with players, I think that they will know that he has their best interest at heart. Like that's something that just kind of radiates off of him. So
yeah,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. I know you were sort of, I don't want to say downgrading, but reevaluating your own abilities as a interviewer vis-a-vis, say, someone who's really done it like Sam or Ira a lot. But in the end, it was very successful, Brian, because I felt that Sharon came across that way very much in his talk with you, and so whatever happened there, whether it was you or him, I felt like you got a real sense of what he's like, and that's was good. I mean, he comes across as a very open, positive, smart, uh, other focused person, and so your interview did convey that, or he was able to convey that in your interview. And so, yeah, I mean, I felt that as a consumer of that interview very, very much. And I think a lot of the commentary was the same on your board. People listening to it felt the same thing.
Same
So,
question for you, Seth. Was there anything where it was like, yeah, man, that was a surprise, or man, I didn't know that?
I mean, we already mentioned the duo inside zone thing, because I mean, I got an article about how they ran duo and had different ways of playing it. after the national championship game, and then Edwards just like, that wasn't duo, man. That first one wasn't duo. The
I
second one was
know. I know.
duo.
Which player are we talking about?
His first touchdown, he's like, that wasn't duo.
First touchdown. What?
In the national championship game.
I guess
Oh,
it was
yeah, yeah,
inside
Donovan's.
zone.
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
inside
yeah,
zone.
yeah. That one. The second one was duo.
Yeah.
That's what he said.
Yeah.
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 The other thing
Yeah.
about Donovan Edwards is like when he talks to you, he kind of reaches out and just kind of taps you on the arm in a very friendly way. And even doing that, I could tell he was absolutely jacked. Like,
Yeah.
like I was like, man, this guy's arm is heavier than most arms I've encountered in my life. So look forward to that, guys.
And doesn't it
Yeah.
feel like he's come a long way in not just as a football player, but sort of, maturing emotionally? I mean, he seems like he's a long way away from where he was a couple of
Well,
years ago.
that's one of the things he
Mhm.
said when I asked him like
Oh.
why he came back. He was like, I just felt like I needed to come back for myself. Just like he felt like he needed to like have the season where he's like the guy at the University of Michigan before he went to the league because he needed that just personally. So yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he mentioned, Sam, you mentioned this last episode that, last year he felt like he was pressing. And that, when you only get 7 to 10 snaps per game, and you're only getting those, that many carries or something, you're trying to maximize them instead of trying to be the best football player you can be, instead of doing your job out there. And I think that got in his head last year, and he knew it was in his head, and it was something he was trying to work through. But it was like, we noticed this. He got in a rhythm last in 2022 at the end of the season, and he was seeing things, and that's where you get that 85-yard and 75-yard touchdown, and then against Purdue, you really saw him seeing the holes develop and hitting them and he couldn't get that rhythm. Even one of his touchdowns in the national championship was first a mistake, and then he fixes it. And there was one against Penn State too, where he was going the wrong way at first, and then he has to fix it. And just letting the game come to him, and just slowing down and letting that happen and letting it become part of his feel was something he didn't get last year because he just didn't have the reps. And now that he's going to have those, there's not going to be any lack of opportunities, right? So that's not going to be a thing anymore.
Yeah. All right, fellas, I'm going to have to depart and get ready to head on over to Lucas Oil. So Ira's going to slide into the middle box. In the meantime, in between time, I want to let those of you who are in the market for a new vehicle know, hey, get on board with Brighton Ford. Head on over and take advantage of their great deal on the 2024 F-150 XLT. That award-winning pickup right now. You can get into one for $314 a month with $3,500 down, or $491 a month with $500 down. That's until the end of the month, which is only 6 days away. So take advantage. That's 8240 West Grand River Avenue in Brighton, Michigan. Online at brightonford.com, or give them a call at 1-800-NEW-FORD. More of the MGoBlog Roundtable on the other side here on the Michigan Insider on Sports Talk 1050 WTK, the ticket.
And we are clear on the radio.
What is up with these Buckeyes coming in the chat? You got another one in there, Mr. Weintraub.
Why
I'll
do they?
take care of 'em.
Why are they here? What are they saying?
Getting
What are
close to the season.
they-
Getting close to the season. All right, fellas, have a good remainder of the show, and I will see you next week.
Later.
Thank you, Sam. Have a good time.
Yeah.
All right,
All
fellas.
right.
Got a couple things to do here to get this situation going. Yeah, we've had some trolls. Apparently, they have nothing else to do.
Yeah.
How are you supposed to troll Michigan fans right now?
They're
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
like,
I'm curious to know what-
cheaters. Oh
I
my!
mean, like, it's just, it's weird that like the Michigan State and the Ohio State people haven't changed their approach at all. Because it's just like, yeah, before that stuff, maybe that would have gotten to me. Maybe I would have been a little like, ugh. But now it's just funny. Like, it's just like you are wasting your time trying to get a rise out of me about this.
Yeah.
This is-
I just have no patience for it. So as soon as I saw it today, I'm like, yeah, I'm done with you guys. I don't understand what they're even doing here exactly, other than
I
finding
mean,
out what it's like to hear to hear what winners talk about. what champs talk about. I don't know. Like,
I mean, it's not like I'm going to listen to an Ohio State blog. I mean, what do our conversation? I don't care. I mean,
I mean, I have to admit that I do occasionally visit the message boards to see how many thousand posts they have on the sign stealing scandal.
but Brian, you're doing that as a professional. It's your job. You're doing research.
A professional, yeah, that's why I do it. I'm a professional. That's
yes.
Well,
yes.
you are. Sorry.
Well, that's not why I do it.
Yeah.
I mean, keep in mind we have our fans who aren't trying to get more information about Michigan. We have lots of people who called OSU $O$U in their cats for many, many years, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not there's not like they have a different kind of fan base than anybody else, except for they do in certain house. Everyone's gonna have those kinds of creeps. And if you're just focusing on those kinds of people, if that's the only people you're interacting with, you're not getting a sense of who the fan base is. I think that the Ohio State fan base is, if you want to say anything general about them, they're not used to having to work as hard as everybody else to get what they get. Right? They're expecting, like, we're going to get the best players and then they're going to go out and win. And it's been a long time since they had to do something extra or come up with a new way of winning or figure out who they are or change. Ryan Day came in as an offensive genius, and now he's got to hand the ball over to Chip Kelly. Like, they haven't done these kinds of things for a long time or felt like they needed to, and it's hard.
Yeah, and their players parrot the comments. That's the Egbuka comment from the other day when he goes, "It doesn't matter if they don't have the talent per se, and we do have the talent. It's going to be a hard game every year." Like, their starting wide receivers, like, yeah, they don't have any talent on that team, but yet they've lost to them 3 years in a row, and like that, they buy into this like it's apparently only about star rating when you get in, and they don't have to develop. I don't know. It's just, it kind of cracks me up.
I don't know. Star rating does matter.
Oh, it matters.
Those guys have those stars is because they've worked so hard already to get there, right? You don't get to 5 stars.
You got to keep working you got to keep doing things when you're there too.
And and plenty of them. I don't want to sit here and like defend the Ohio State program. I think that I think that what happened was Michigan found something. Found a new way of doing things that really wasn't how programs were built before, and really wasn't even how Michigan was built before, unless you want to go back to how Yost coached, because that's the kind of things that we were doing. It's been 100 years since we've had coaches who, bring love into the program as like a center thing. How there will be hugs kind of concept of coaching and how you talk to these people and how you do this. It wasn't done for years. It was, the generals of the 60s and 70s. Or before them, it was like the God figures, like Fitz Chrysler. We haven't coached like this for a long time. And I think Michigan found something. I think it worked, and it made Michigan better than what Ohio State was. And Ohio State now has to find something to make themselves better. That's how this rivalry works. You get better because of each other.
Do you guys think it's funny? Do you guys think it's funny as I do that I got one of these, I get these emails all the time, like betting odds on different stuff. And it makes sense. First head coach fired odds. That makes sense that like Billy Napier is high on the list, but Ryan Day is actually right there at 12-1 on the odds.
On getting fired?
I mean, how many
being first head coach fired?
I mean,
not even getting fired. First head coach fired. He's on the list at 12-1.
Isn't he 40-0 in the Big Ten except for Michigan?
Yeah, it is. All right, guys, we're coming back on radio. And we are back here on the Michigan Insider, Sports Talk 1050, WTK, the ticket online at WTKA.com. So Sam is off to Lucas Oil Stadium for Big Ten Media Days, Day 3, the final day. And I am here now with the MGoBlog Roundtable for the conclusion of the hour. And guys, before we get to back to specifically Michigan football, I'm kind of curious, actually. The last couple of days, I know you were very busy at the golf outing a couple of days ago. But do you guys find Big Ten Media Days to have been as boring as I have these last couple of days? It just doesn't seem like there's like a lot. Maybe today we'll pick it up because Michigan gets some more attention. I don't know. Like, there's a little bit with Ryan Day on Tuesday, but it's been kind of quiet as far as like fun stuff or maybe spicy comments has been really boring.
Well, like, what happened last year that was interesting? Like,
Well,
what's the
Michigan.
baseline here?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure any of these are that exciting, but you go in, you're like expecting somebody to say something and make it. And you had Deshaun Foster go out there yesterday. Did you guys see his introductory yesterday? That might have been
that was interesting. Right? That's like interesting on the who's the Illinois coach? Dave Beckman.
Yeah.
Oh, Tim Beck.
Tim Beckman.
Tim Beckman.
He's on the Beckman list now. So that's I'll take it.
the
What
Beckman
I
spectrum.
don't know what happened. I mean,
He went out yesterday and how do you not prepare? They say you're going to have an introductory statement and then we'll do a Q&A. How does your SID not prepare you for the introductory statement? And he comes up, he goes, hello. I don't know if you all know that much about UCLA football, but we're in LA. It's us out there. It's us in USC. And like, that's kind of what it was, right? Like it was really, it was bad.
Yeah.
It was bad. I don't want to liken it to anything recently, but it was that bad.
Well, I thought the questions for Petiti were interesting in his response. I think the second person was from Bucknuts, and he said, and it was essentially, when is Michigan getting its notice of allegations from the NCAA for cheating? I mean, that was essentially the question. And Petiti was like, "Nah, we handled that right. I don't know anything. It's all good, basically."
Well, it was interesting.
I thought that was interesting
because Brett McMurphy called this guy out on Twitter. And it was like, someone asked, of course it's the Ohio State beat. So it's interesting that that beat has a reputation even within the journalism industry as being just like shameless fanboys. And I'm a shameless fanboy, but I'm not that level of shameless fanboy.
Yeah. So I thought that was interesting, and the way, Petiti just sort of pushed it aside was,
Well, I
was
think
all
that's
good.
probably the last thing he wants to talk about for the rest of his life.
Yeah,
Because
my
every
guess is-
time it comes up, someone is going to be furious at him. Michigan fans are going to be furious at him. Ohio State fans are going to be furious at him for not doing enough. Michigan State, I guess the Iowa fans will be like, cool. Like, whatever.
Yeah.
We weren't scoring a point in that Big Ten championship game, no matter who we played. So, it's all right.
Yeah, and then they asked James Franklin about the conference championships. I think maybe if there's anything that it was interesting that came out of it, because we haven't heard what coaches are thinking about the new system and how they didn't even announce the tiebreakers yet, so they didn't even know what their system is. He's coming from the perspective this year of he's got the easiest schedule of all the potential Big Ten competitors, but then he's going to have to play somebody big as opposed to somebody from the Big Ten West at the end of the season. And his comments on that, he's like, you're never going to get them to change this thing because there's too much money. It's basically what he said, right? They're not going to give it up because they want the money of the championship, even though it doesn't really decide anything. It doesn't really tell you anything. It's like kind of a purposeless game. And maybe even more so, I'm not putting words in his mouth now, but I'm saying the gist of what I thought he was telling us. And it's we've now gotten ourselves into a situation where we have this game that's going to be pumped up as the Big Ten championship that is really going to be less valuable than 5 or 6 games that were played during the season. It might be a replay, more likely than not a replay of one of those games. And it's like, what are we even doing here? We're just going to hurt from a perspective of a playoff system. All it does is hurt you that you play that game. So can we please look at my system of having a showcase now, because that's going to make you more money. You can't screw this up, and it's going to be better for your teams going into the playoff, and people are going to want to watch these games as opposed to, these. How many times did we have an interesting game in the Big Ten West versus the Big Ten East? One, Michigan State, Iowa. Is there another one that was an interesting game? Michigan hadn't played Iowa the 2 times we played. I mean, we hadn't played Purdue last year, so that was interesting at least. But only interesting in what's Michigan going to do against an 8-4 team that's ranked in the 30s or 40s in S&P. It's not it's not a marquee game. And if you want there to be marquee games, you can do it, because at the end of the season with all these teams, you're going to have big games that weren't played. Let's play them.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I think they may evolve to that also. The first time two teams play each other 3 times in a year, somebody may say, because could well happen. In fact,
Yeah, we could double up. We could double up Ryan Day's losses this year. He's got 3 to Michigan already. We could lose to Michigan in the game. We could lose them following week in the Big Ten championship. We can lose to them in the playoff.
Right, exactly.
I do think that although it's baffling to me that they haven't stepped in and said this yet, but I thought for sure at some point they'd be like, we're not going to have first round rematches in the playoff, because that's something that like college hockey does. That's something that pretty much every March. Yeah, well, March Madness, I think it's actually the first 2 rounds.
Yeah, it's the first weekend. Yeah, they avoided the whole first weekend.
Yeah.
So they haven't said they're going to do that, but I'm sure that they will. So that will cut down on the possibility of that somewhat. I just it's a difficult situation to talk about this, because there's a fair chance, as Seth mentioned, that the Big Ten championship game participants will not be at all clear at some point. Maybe not this year, but down the road, there's going to be a difficult situation where people are going on like point differential or something. It's going to be like a World Cup group where it's like, well,
for argument's sake, if Michigan, Oregon, and Ohio State all beat each other, right? So in some fashion, they all go 1-1 against each other.
Yeah.
And everyone else has 2 losses or more, then we're going to start digging into those tiebreakers.
Yeah.
Well, what if Michigan goes into the Big Ten championship game 12-0 with a win in Columbus by 35 points, and Ohio State has 2 losses, and Ohio State then beats Michigan in the Big Ten championship? So now you have the team that went 13? Sorry, now you got a team that went 10-2 or 11-2,
11-2
over the team that went 12-1 that beat them on their home field because we changed the venue. Like, that's what you're talking about. And you're going to have this in the playoff too. You're going to have a 3-loss champion one of these years, and another team that only had 1 bad game against that team and maybe beat them earlier in the season, and they're not going to be the champion. It's not going to give you a champion.
It's going to be unlikely that a 2-loss team makes the Big Ten championship game when you have 18 teams. It's just there's going to be more options at the 1-loss level. So I don't necessarily think that gap is likely to occur.
I've gamed it out with past seasons. I put this all into a spreadsheet and saw what happened. You get a lot of 2-loss teams, actually.
The other question,
as your number 2 team.
But somebody brought it up yesterday. I think it was yesterday. One of the coaches brought it up that we might get. It may have been Matt Rule, but one of the coaches brought it up about if you're in the situation you just brought up, Seth. Michigan would already clinch the spot in the Big Ten championship game before going to Columbus. So do teams start treating that last game of the season, even if it's your biggest rivalry game, do you start treating that game like NFL teams treat the last game of the season when they've already clinched their spot? And do you start getting into that scenario? I know you can't the next week, but the fact is the next week's game is more important, because the 13th game, you win that, you get the bye in the first round of the playoff. If you lose that game, you're still in the playoff, but you now have to play in the first round of the playoff. Even if you're going to get a home game, you're now adding more games to your season.
That is actually pretty interesting.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No, that's something I hadn't thought of before. Is like the auto buys for conference champions does sort of make the conference championship game almost too important relative to the last week of the season. Because, I mean, for a certain subset of teams, if you already have a loss, which most teams are going to have, then you're really going to want to win that game, because the home games in the first round makes it a big deal to be 5 through 8. So I do think that the structure of the playoff is fine-grained enough that you're not going to see teams just kind of like not care about the last game of their season, because there are very few teams that will be able to afford a loss there and either not have that impact their chances of getting in, or have that impact their chances of getting a home game.
Well, let me ask you this. Let's say Michigan, Ohio State, Oregon are all 11-1. Do you want to play in the championship game or not?
You have to. You want to. You want to win it because you want the bye the next week. You want to play one less game in the playoff.
Well, and then the crazy thing about the bye is like you get the bye, you don't get a home game.
Right.
Like you have to go to like the Peach Bowl as your first playoffs game, and it's just kind of like,
Yeah, I'm
And
not
that's
sure
like
I
the
want
that's like the
bye.
round of 8 too. Like I kind of like semis, like the way they do it now, I guess would be fine. Where the semis and the final are at bowl sites, but the 4 games at bowl sites means that you can win your conference, and then that environment that you could enjoy, you're not going to enjoy.
I mean, one of the other things too is the potential for the rematch is going to just naturally take away from the games. If you, I've now been having the opportunity to chart a bunch of these Michigan Ohio State games, and every year they are the best played game, the best ideas, right? They dump the playbook, the level that these guys are playing at, except Ohio State's defense in 2021 kind of lost the they just got shook. But the level this game was played at, and if you go back and look at last year's Michigan Ohio State game, that was the best game that either one of those teams played. You look at the Alabama game. Michigan made a lot of mistakes. The Washington game, Michigan gave Washington some opportunities to come back in that. The gas was on the entire time in that Michigan Ohio State game, and Ohio State was doing the same thing. Both of them just brilliantly coached. You could tell both these teams planned for each other all season, that this was the game. And when it's not the game anymore, if you have potential for playing these guys again, do you play that way? Do you throw everything on the table, or does one team use everything they've got to win that one, and the other one, who's trying to win a Big Ten championship at the time, we have to play out scenarios that are not necessarily both these teams are competing for the Big Ten championship or in the
Well,
same way.
like this is one thing that you have 18 teams. Like, and right now the schedules are just a complete mishmash of this team's playing this team, this team's playing this other team, and at the end we'll figure it out. And that's ridiculous. Now, if you do split the conference into 2 divisions, the problem is that you never play any of the teams from the other division, because if you play 9 conference games and you're in a 19 division, you get 1 crossover game per year. Mm-hmm. So the solution here is to annually have divisions, but to change them every year, so that you do have at the end of the season a fairly good idea of who should be participating in the Big Ten championship game, and you avoid the late season rematch issue, because Michigan, Ohio State are always going to be in the same division in the Big Ten. That's fine. That means that this kind of question, this devaluing of the game, doesn't happen. And I just don't see how this is going to be. The free-for-all is going to be a viable format for a long period of time. I just think there are going to be problems. There's going to be stuff that people don't like, and eventually they will adopt. I think it's been called pods by guys like Bill Connolly, who works for ESPN, where there's 4 teams in a pod, and then you swap the pods around and whatever, et cetera, et cetera. Then that way, the only problem with that situation is like, okay, what happens when we want to swap Oregon into the Michigan Ohio State pod?
Right.
Then you get like a situation that you had, which the Big Ten had for basically the duration of the time it was a 14-team conference, where the real championship was whoever won the East was going to win the title. So, but we'll see what happens. I just don't feel like this free-for-all is going to be valid.
Yeah, the first year of the Big Ten is going to be interesting to see how and watch. Real quick before we wrap up this thing. Yesterday there were a couple of comments that I wanted your guys' take on. The first one was from Kirk Ferentz when he said, "Quote: We have the potential to be a good offensive team." See a stand-up comic now.
Yeah, false.
False. Well, I mean, they got rid of Brian Ferentz. Things can't be worse. I expect that they will be slightly better this year, because they will not have Deacon Hill as their quarterback. Cade McNamara is old. He's experienced. He's a guy who has been a functional Big Ten quarterback before. And I mean, their problem was that their offensive line really kind of fell off a cliff. Like, they used to be putting guys, those farm boys, in the NFL, and then they haven't really had an NFL candidate since that their center, I forget his name, went to the league. So I feel like
Lindemann. He's on the Raiders.
Lindemann.
Yeah. So that's what they need to get back. Like, if they're going to do an offense, like, they're never going to have great wide receivers. They will be able to find a running back from time to time, and then they need to get that OL back to a spot where they are, the 4th or 5th best rushing offense in the league, and they have a game manager quarterback, and they're opposite that defense. And that's an Iowa team that I think is going to hit their ceiling. Now, that ceiling is probably not going to be winning an 18-team Big Ten under Kirk Ferentz, but they can make a playoff here and there, I think.
I mean, the time of Iowa was when they had the Big Ten West, and they got to go to the Big Ten championship, and then that was the game they had to prepare for. And,
well, I mean,
they never won it, but
in the past they've never been like an offensive juggernaut, but they've had, like, when they had Drew Tate as their quarterback, Ricky Stanzi, they had the Daryl Johnson Koulianos, all those tight ends.
The Banks year. Was it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tavian Banks. Like, if they get like some talent, especially if that quarterback can like make some plays on his own, the ceiling of their offense is not Ohio State, but it's decent. This is a solid program that at points in the past has been, a reasonable offensive program, and they just need to get back to that. And I don't know if they can under Ferentz, because Ferentz is, he's the dean of coaches in college football right now. He's getting up there in age, and he made a colossal mistake with his son. Just a colossal decade-spanning mistake that he was never going to fix himself. Like, he had to have other people, prevail upon him to let his son go, and they had to do it in the most ridiculous way possible by putting, a points goal on the table for Ferentz that Brian Ferentz didn't come anywhere near meeting. And at that point, you do start to wonder if maybe his judgment has declined over the past decade and he's not going to get back to where he was. But I mean, we'll see.
Anyone can make. I mean, what was he? He was, he was nepotistic about his son. That's a failing of all humans, I think. Every father knows that, when
I mean, there's a difference when when it's J-Ball and he's clearly doing a good job.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Oh, of course. But Jim was, lucky that Jay was such a competent individual in so many different areas, because they moved him around all over the place.
Right, but also so it's different when the nepotism is like, I got his foot in the door, I'm sure. But he proved over his tenure at Michigan, that he deserved to be here. And what Brian Ferentz proved very early on at his tenure in Iowa, because he was the offensive line coach when they started falling off, that he was promoted after that. Like, and that's one thing that Harbaugh never did. He never, he used Jay in a ton of different roles, but he was never the offensive coordinator. That was always something that I think was a bridge too far for him under his father.
I'm not sure. I know. Just seeing how well Jay does in every scenario they put him in. But I'm
not saying that he's not capable of doing it. Yeah. What I am saying is that, like, I don't think Jim Harbaugh was ever going to promote his son to be the offensive coordinator, no matter how good of a coach he was.
Yeah, I don't think Jay was pushing his father to put him in any roles that he couldn't do, and I think Brian was. I think Kirk wanted his son to succeed him as the head coach of Iowa. And the way to do that was to make him the coordinator, and then have enough success that he could be the next head coach of Iowa and continue the Ferentz tradition. And, sometimes and Jim Harbaugh wasn't doing that with Jay. Jim Harbaugh was identifying talent and letting other people come to the fore. And, if you don't have the culture that you have at Michigan if Harbaugh was doing that. So I agree with you. It's I understand why you'd try to do that. He was trying to position Brian to be the head coach, and he kept going long after it was clear that wasn't a possibility.
All right, guys, last one real quickly for you. We have a few minutes left as we wrap up Big Ten football media days today in Indianapolis, and obviously all the teams are trying to get back to Indianapolis. How many teams in the Big Ten actually have a realistic chance to get to Indianapolis? There's 18 teams that we've said. How many actually right now at the beginning of the year you look at and go, yeah, they have a shot to maybe get to Indy?
3. It's going to be Michigan, Oregon, Ohio State. I don't believe in Penn State. Iowa's like 5th in the conference rankings, and I don't believe that they're going to be good enough to make it. I mean, I guess I have to look at everybody's schedules. So usually it's possible that, Michigan has a very difficult schedule this year that might knock them down a couple of times. And if Oregon and Ohio State have similar schedules, but I believe that Ohio State doesn't have quite as bad of a introduction.
Yeah,
to the
Ohio
18
State's
Big
got
Ten
an easier path, but they still have to go through Oregon.
Yeah.
USC's kind of out there too. There's just a lot of talent on that team.
I just don't. I mean, they're replacing Caleb Williams. Their defense was
Mhm.
abominable last year, and I think they'll be better. But I think that the first step from USC's defense last year is just to be kind of bad, not really bad. So I kind of feel like Oregon's. I'm betting, I think Oregon could be your national championship favorite because their question mark was, what are we going to do at quarterback? And they answered it with Dylan Gabriel. So that's pretty good.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
No, I would put 5 teams in. I have Michigan, Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, and USC. I think those are all plausible. Now, what happens to them, I don't know. But I think there's at least 5 teams that are plausible.
Penn State's schedule is such that they could have the same season as Michigan and have 2 fewer losses. So that's why I think Penn State's got a good shot.
Yeah.
If somebody a little better than Rutgers had Rutgers' schedule, you guys might include that team because Rutgers plays USC, but they do not play Ohio State, they do not play Oregon, and they do not play Michigan.
Really?
But
there you go. Put Rutgers in there too.
What are you gonna do? Before we get out of here, shout out to the 42 Michigan Olympians about to hit the various courts in Paris, and shout out to Michigan State's 3.
That is a great way to end it, guys. Appreciate you joining me here on the round.
All in for all 45 of them.
I think Jade Rivera in women's soccer for Team Canada is in action maybe this morning. So that's like the first Michigan athlete in action. And so Abby Tamer with field hockey, I believe, is later this week, and just keep on following. So
we're about to get an explosion of hockey commits because they can commit on August 1st. And I think Brandon Norado is going to clean up in the 26 class.
And you guys will be with us on August 1st to talk about that and more next week. So appreciate it, guys. We'll see everybody next week. This has been the MGoBlog Roundtable, and this has been the Michigan Insider on Sports Talk 1050 WTKA Ann Arbor, a Cumulus station.
Thanks, guys.